First verse. In the days that followed, David struck hard at the Philistines, brought them to their knees, and took control of the countryside. He also fought and defeated Moab. He chose 2/3 of them randomly and executed them. The other third he spared. So the Moabites fell under David's rule and were forced to bring tribute. On his way to restore his sovereignty at the river Euphrates, David next defeated Hadadezer, son of Rehob, the king of Zobah. He captured from him 1,000 chariots, 7,000 cavalry, and 20,000 infantry. He hamstrung all the chariot horses, but saved back 100. When the Arameans from Damascus came to the aid of Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David killed 22,000 of them. David set up a puppet government in Aram, Damascus. The Arameans became subjects of David and were forced to bring tribute. God gave victory to David wherever he marched. David plundered the gold shields that belonged to the servants of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. He also looted a great quantity of bronze from Tebah and Berothai, cities of Hadadezer. Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had struck down the entire army of Hadadezer. So he sent his son Joram to King David to greet and congratulate him for fighting and defeating them. For Toi and Hadadezer were old enemies. He brought with him gifts of silver, gold, and bronze. King David consecrated these along with the silver and gold from all the nations he had conquered. From Aram, Moab, the Ammonites, the Philistines, and from Amalek, along with the plunder from Hadadezer, son of Rehob, king of Zobah. David built a victory monument on his return from defeating the Arameans. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, fought and defeated the Edomites in the Salt Valley. 18,000 of them were killed. David set up a puppet government in Edom, and the Edomites became subject under David. God gave David victory wherever he marched. Thus David ruled over all Israel. He ruled well, fair, and even-handed in all his duties and relationships. Joab, son of Zeruiah, was head of the army. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was clerk. Zadok, son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, son of Abiathar, were priests. Zeruiah was secretary. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were priests. David's sons were priests. David's from the tribe of Judah. So why would his sons, who are Judahites, be priests? Okay, learn something new every day. 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1. An open table for Mephibosheth. One day David said, "Is there anyone left of Saul's army? If so, I'd like to show him some kindness in honor of Jonathan." It happened that a servant from Saul's army named Ziba was there. They called him into David's presence. The king asked him, "Are you Ziba?" "Yes, sir," he replied. The king asked, "Is there anyone left from the family of Saul to whom I can show some godly kindness?" Ziba told the king, "Yes, there is Jonathan's son, lame in both feet." "Where is he?" "He's living at the home of Machir, son of Ammiel, in Lodebar." King David didn't lose a minute. He sent and got him from the home of Machir, son of Ammiel, in Lodebar. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, who was the son of Saul, came before David, he bowed deeply, abasing himself, honoring David. David spoke his name, Mephibosheth. "Yes, sir." "Don't be frightened," said David. "I'd like to do something special for you in memory of your father, Jonathan. To begin with, I'm returning to you all the properties of your grandfather Saul. Furthermore, from now on, you'll take all your meals at my table." Isn't that something? Because how we always talk about him is like he's someone poor and then comes to the king's table, but he had already been brought up at the king's table and he was restored everything he lost. That's interesting. Never saw it that way. All right, shuffling and stammering, not looking him in the eye, Mephibosheth said, "Who am I that you pay attention to a stray dog like me?" David then called Ziba, Saul's right-hand man, and told him, "Everything that belonged to Saul and his family, I've handed over to your master's grandson. You and your sons and your servants will work his land and bring in the produce provisions for your master's grandson. Mephibosheth himself, your master's grandson, from now on will take all his meals at my table." Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. "All that my master the king has ordered his servant," answered Ziba, "your servant will surely do." And Mephibosheth ate at the king's table just like one of the royal family. Mephibosheth also had a small son named Micah. All who were part of Ziba's household were now servants of Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, taking all his meals at the king's table. He was lame in both feet. 2 Samuel chapter 10. But didn't David say earlier that the lame and the weak would not come into the palace? But yet he's lame and he gets into the palace. Gotcha. Story's coming together now. All right, 2 Samuel chapter 10, verse 1. Sometime after this, the king of the Ammonites died, and Hanun, his son, succeeded him as king. David said, "I'd like to show some kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash, treat him as well and as kindly as his father treated me." So David sent Hanun condolences regarding his father. But when David's servants got to the land of the Ammonites, the Ammonite leaders warned Hanun, their head delegate, do you for a minute suppose that David is honoring your father by sending you comforters? Don't you think it's because he wants to snoop around the city and size it up that David has sent his emissaries to you? So Hanun seized David's men, shaved off half their beards, cut off their robes halfway up their buttocks, and sent them packing. When all this was reported to David, he sent someone to meet them, for they were seriously humiliated. The king told them, stay in Jericho until your beards grow out, only then come back. When it dawned on the Ammonites that as far as David was concerned, they stunk to high heaven, they hired Aramean soldiers from Beth Rohab and Zobah, 20,000 infantry and 1,000 men from the king of Makkah, and 12,000 men from Tob. When David heard this, he dispatched Joab with the strongest fighters in full force. The Ammonites marched out and arranged themselves in battle formation at the city gate. The Arameans of Zobah and Rohab and the men of Tob and Makkah took up a position out in the open fields. When Joab saw that he had two fronts to fight before and behind, he took his pick of the best of Israel and deployed them to confront the Arameans. The rest of the army he put under the command of Abishai, his brother, and deployed them to confront the Ammonites. Then he said, if the Arameans are too much for me, you help me. If the Ammonites prove too much for you, I'll come and help you. Courage, we'll fight tooth and nail for our people, for the cities of our God, and God will do whatever he sees needs doing. But when Joab and his soldiers moved in to fight the Arameans, they ran off in full retreat. Then the Ammonites, seeing the Arameans run for dear life, took their heels from Abishai and went into the city. So Joab left off fighting the Ammonites and returned to Jerusalem. When the Arameans saw how badly they'd been beaten by Israel, they picked up the pieces and regrouped. Hadadezer sent for the Arameans who were across the river. They came to Helam. Shobak, commander of Hadadezer's army, led them, and all this was reported to David. So David mustered Israel, crossed the Jordan, and came to Helam. The Arameans went into battle formation, ready for David, and the fight was on. But the Arameans again scattered before Israel. David killed 700 chariot drivers and 40,000 cavalry, and he mortally wounded Shobak, the army commander, who died on the battlefield. When all the kings who were vassals of Hadadezer saw that they had been routed by Israel, they made peace and became Israel's vassals. The Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites ever again. 2 Samuel chapter 11, David's sin and sorrow. When that time of year came around, the anniversary of the Ammonite aggression, David dispatched Joab and his fighting men of Israel in full force to destroy the Ammonites for good. They laid siege to Rabbah, but David stayed in Jerusalem. One late afternoon, David got up from taking his nap and was strolling on the roof of the palace. From his vantage point on the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was stunningly beautiful. David sent to ask about her and was told, isn't this Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? Why would you answer with a question? David sent his agents to get her. After she arrived, he went to bed with her. This occurred during the time of purification following her period. Then she returned home. Before long, she realized she was pregnant. Later, she sent word to David, I'm pregnant. David then got in touch with Joab. Send Uriah the Hittite to me. Joab sent him. When he arrived, David asked him for news from the front, how things were going with Joab and the troops with the fighting. Then he said to Uriah, go home, have a refreshing bath and a good night's rest. After Uriah left the palace, an informant of the king was sent after him, but Uriah didn't go home. He slept that night at the palace entrance along with the king's servants. David was told that Uriah had not gone home. He asked Uriah, didn't you just come off a hard trip? So why didn't you go home? Uriah replied to David, the chest is out there with the fighting men of Israel and Judah in tents. My master Joab and his servants are roughing it out in the field. So how can I go home and eat and drink and enjoy my wife? On your life, I'll not do it. All right, said David, have it your way. Stay for the day. I'll send you back tomorrow. So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem the rest of the day. The next day, David invited him to eat and drink with him, and David got him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out and slept with his master's servants. He didn't go home. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In the letter he wrote, put Uriah in the front lines where the fighting is the fiercest, then pull back and leave him exposed so that he's sure to be killed. So Joab, holding the city under siege, put Uriah in a place where he knew there were fierce enemy fighters. When the city's defenders came out to fight Joab, some of David's soldiers were killed, including Uriah the Hittite. Joab sent David a full report on the battle. He instructed the messenger, after you give the king a detailed report on the battle, if he flares in anger, say, and by the way, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. Joab's messengers arrived in Jerusalem and gave the king a full report. He said, the enemy was too much for us. They advanced on us in the open field and we pushed them back to the city gate. But then arrows came hot and heavy on us from the city wall, and 18 of the king's soldiers died. When the messenger completed his report of the battle, David got angry at Joab. He vented it on the messenger. Why did you get so close to the city? Didn't you know you'd be attacked from the wall? Didn't you remember how Abimelech, son of Jerubbasheth, got killed? Wasn't it a woman who dropped a millstone on him from the wall and crushed him at Thebez? Why did you go so close to the wall? By the way, said Joab's messenger, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. Then David told the messenger, oh, I see. Tell Joab, don't trouble yourself over this. War kills. Sometimes one, sometimes another. You never know who's next. Redouble your assault on the city and destroy it. Encourage Joab. Ooh, that's wickedness. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she grieved for her husband. Yeah, right. What were you doing out there bathing in front of the palace with the king? I don't believe that. Grieve for your husband. When the time of mourning was over, David sent someone to bring her to his house. She became his wife and bore him a son. That's what you're after in the first place. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 1. But God was not pleased at all with what David had done. Definitely not. And sent Nathan to David. Nathan said to him, there were two men in the same city, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had huge flocks of sheep, herds of cattle. The poor man had nothing but one little female lamb, which he had brought up and raised. It grew up with him and his children as a member of the family. It ate off his plate and drank from his cup and slept on his bed. It was like a daughter to him. One day a traveler dropped in on the rich man. He was too stingy to take an animal from his own herds or flocks to make a meal for his visitor. So he took the poor man's lamb and prepared a meal to set before his guests. David exploded in anger. As surely as God lives, he said to Nathan, the man who did this ought to be lynched. David's always talking about killing someone. He must repay for the lamb 4 times over for his crime and stinginess. You're the man, said Nathan. And here's what God says, the God of Israel has to say to you. I made you king over Israel. I freed you from the fist of Saul. I gave you your master's daughter and other wives to have and to hold. I gave you both Israel and Judah. And if that hadn't been enough, I'd have gladly thrown in much more. So why have you treated the word of God with brazen contempt, doing this great evil? You murdered Uriah the Hittite, then took his wife as your wife. Worse, you killed him with an Ammonite sword. And now because you treated God with contempt and took Uriah the Hittite's wife as your wife, killing and murder will continually plague your family. This is God speaking. Remember, I'll make trouble for you out of your own family. I'll take your wives from right in front of you. I'll give them to some neighbor, and he'll go to bed with them openly. You did your deed in secret. I'm going to do mine. I'm doing mine with the whole country watching. Then David confessed to Nathan, I've sinned against God. Nathan pronounced, yes, but that's not the last word. God forgives your sin. You won't die for it. But because of your blasphemous behavior, the son born to you will die. That baby didn't do nothing. And Nathan went home. God afflicted the child. Wow. That Uriah's wife bore to David, and he came down sick. David prayed desperately to God for the little boy. He fasted, wouldn't go out, slept on the floor. The elders in his family came in and tried to get him off the floor, but he wouldn't budge, nor could they get him to eat anything. On the 7th day, the child died. Sad. David's servants were afraid to tell him. They said, what do we do now? While the child was living, he wouldn't listen to a word we said. Now with the child dead, if we speak to him, there's no telling what he'll do. David noticed that his servants were whispering behind his back and realized that the boy must have died. He asked the servants, is the boy dead? Yes, they answered, he's dead. David got up from the floor, washed his face, combed his hair, put on a fresh change of clothes, then went into the sanctuary and worshiped. Then he came home and asked for something to eat. They had set it before him and he ate. His servants asked him, what's going on with you? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept and stayed up all night. Now that he's dead, you get up and eat. While the child was alive, he said, I fasted and wept, thinking God might have mercy on me and the child would live. But now that he's dead, why fast? Can I bring him back now? I can go to him, but he can't come to me. David went and comforted his wife Bathsheba. Yeah, right. And when he slept with her, they conceived a son. When he was born, they named him Solomon. God had a special love for him, that's the mercy of God, and sent word by Nathan the prophet that God wanted him named Jedediah, which means God's beloved. Joab at war in Rabbah against the Ammonites captured the royal city. He sent messengers to David saying, I'm fighting at Rabbah and I've captured the city's water supply. Hurry and get the rest of the troops together and set up camp here at the city and complete the capture yourself. Otherwise, I'll capture it and get all the credit instead of you. Oh, you big-headed thing. That's the devil. So David marshaled all the troops, went to Rabbah and fought and captured it. He took the crown from their king's head, very heavy with gold and with a precious stone in it. It ended up on David's head, and they plundered the city, carrying off a great quantity of loot. David emptied the city of its people and put them to slave labor using saws, picks, and axes and making bricks. He did this to all the Ammonite cities. Then David and the whole army returned to Jerusalem. 2 Samuel chapter 13. Sometime later this happened. Absalom, David's son, had a sister who was very attractive. Her name was Tamar. Amnon, and also David's son, was in love with her. Amnon was obsessed with his sister Tamar to the point of making himself sick over her. She was a virgin, so he couldn't see how he could get his hands on her. Amnon had a good friend, Jonadab, the son of David's brother, Shemiah. Jonadab was exceptionally streetwise. He said to Amnon, "Why are you moping around like this day after day, you son of the king? Tell me what's eating at you." "In a word, Tamar," said Amnon, "my brother Absalom's sister. I'm in love with her." "Here's what you do," said Jonadab. "Go to bed and pretend you're sick. When your father comes to visit, say, 'Have my sister Tamar come and prepare some supper for me where I can watch her and she can feed me.'" So Amnon took to his bed and acted sick. When the king came to visit, Amnon said, "Would you do me a favor? Have my sister Tamar come and make some nourishing dumplings here where I can watch her and be fed by her." Make some dumplings. I've heard everything. David sent word to Tamar, who was at home at the time. David, why would you do something stupid like that? "Go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare a meal for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house. She took dough, kneaded it, formed it into dumplings, and cooked them while he watched from his bed. But when she took the cooking pot and served him, he wouldn't eat. Amnon said, "Clear everyone out the house." And they cleared all out. And they all cleared out. Then he said to Tamar, "Bring the food into my bedroom where we can eat in privacy." She took the nourishing dumplings she had prepared and brought them to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she got ready to feed him, he grabbed her and said, "Come to bed with me, my sister." "No, brother," she said, "don't hurt me. This kind of thing isn't done in Israel. Don't do this terrible thing. Where could I ever show my face? And you'll be on the street in disgrace. Oh, please speak to the king. He'll let you marry me." What? I don't know. It just goes from bad to worse. But he wouldn't listen. Being much stronger than she, he raped her. No sooner had Amnon raped her than he hated her, an immense hatred. That's a demon is what that is. That was a demon possessed. The hatred that he felt for her was greater than the love he had for her. "Get up," he said, "and get out." "Oh, no, brother," she said, "please, this is even a worse evil than what you just did to me." But he wouldn't listen to her. He called for his valet. "Get rid of this woman. Get her out of my sight," and lock the door after her. The valet threw her out and locked the door behind her. She was wearing a long-sleeved gown. That's how virgin princesses used to dress from early adolescence on. Tamar poured ashes on her head. Then she ripped the long-sleeved gown, held her head in her hands, and walked away sobbing as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has your brother Amnon had his way with you? Now, my dear sister, let's keep it quiet, a family matter. He is, after all, your brother. Don't take this so hard." Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's home, bitter and desolate. Yeah, but watch what Absalom does. King David heard the whole story and was enraged, but he didn't discipline Amnon. David doted on him because he was his firstborn. Absalom quit speaking to Amnon, not a word, whether good or bad, because he hated him for violating his sister Tamar. 2 years went by. One day Absalom threw a sheep shearing party in Baal-hazor in the vicinity of Ephraim, invited all the king's sons. He also went to the king and invited him. "Look, I'm throwing a sheep shearing party. Come and bring your servants." But the king said, "No, son, not this time. And not the whole household will just be a burden to you." Absalom pushed, but David wouldn't budge, but it did give him a blessing. Then Absalom said, "Well, if you won't come, at least let my brother Amnon come." "And why," said the king, "should he go with you?" But Absalom was so insistent that he gave in and let Amnon and all the rest of the king's sons go. David, you forgot about what happened? You must have a touch of forgetfulness or something. Absalom prepared a banquet fit for a king. Then he instructed his servants, "Look sharp now. When Amnon is well into the sauce and feeling no pain, I give the order, strike Amnon, kill him, and don't be afraid. I'm the one giving the command. Courage, you can do it." Absalom's servants did to Amnon exactly what their master ordered. All the king's sons got out as fast as they could, jumped on their mules and rode off. While they were still on the road, a rumor came to the king. Absalom just killed all the king's sons, not one is left. The king stood up, ripped his clothes to shreds, threw himself on the floor. All the servants who were standing around at the time did the same. Just then Jonadab, his brother Shemiah's son, stepped up. "My master must not think that all the young men, the king's sons, are dead. Only Amnon is dead." This happened because of Absalom's outrage since the day that Amnon violated his sister Tamar. So my master the king mustn't make things worse than they are, thinking that all your sons are dead. Only Amnon is dead. Absalom fled. Just then the sentry on duty looked up and saw a cloud of dust on the road from Horonim alongside the mountain. He came and told the king, I've just seen a bunch of men on the Horonim road coming around the mountain. Then Jonadab explained to the king, see, it's the king's sons coming, just as I said. He had no sooner said the words than the king's son burst in, loud laments and weeping. Why didn't you all weep when this boy raped that girl? Why didn't you do that? But you're weeping now. Double standard. See, the Bible doesn't teach you just what to do, but what not to do. The king joined in along with all the servants, loud weeping, many tears. David mourned the death of his son a long time. Why didn't you mourn the rape of your daughter? See? When Absalom fled, he went to Talmai, son of Amminadab, king of Geshur. He was there for 3 years. The king finally gave up trying to get back at Absalom. He had come to terms with Amnon's death. 2 Kings 14. Joab, son of Zeruiah, knew that the king deep down still cared for Absalom. So he sent to Tekoa for a wise woman who lived there and instructed her. Pretend you're in mourning, dress in black, and don't comb your hair so you look like you've been grieving over a dead loved one for a long time. Then go to the king and tell him this. Joab then told her exactly what to say. The woman of Tekoa went to the king, bowed deeply before him in homage, and said, O king, help. He said, how can I help? I'm a widow, she said. My husband is dead and I had 2 sons. 2 of them got into a fight out in the field and there was no one around to step between them. The one struck the other and killed him. Then the whole family ganged up against me and demanded, hand over this murderer so we can kill him for the life of the brother he murdered. They want to wipe out the air and snuff out the one spark of life left to me. And then there would be nothing left of my husband, not so much as a name on the face of the earth. So now I've dared come to the king, my master, about all this. They're making my life miserable and I'm afraid. I said to myself, I'll go to the king. Maybe he'll do something. Joab told you to say all this? It's just too much talking you're doing. When the king hears what's going on, he'll step in and rescue me from the abuse of the man who would get rid of me and my son and God's inheritance, the works. As your handmaid, I decided ahead of time, the word of my master, the king, will be the last word in this. For my master is like an angel of God in discerning good and evil. God be with you. I don't know whether Joab told her to say all that stuff. I'll take all responsibility for what happens, the woman of Tekoa said. Tekoa said, I don't want to compromise the king and his reputation. Bring the man who's been harassing you, the king continued. I'll see to it that he doesn't bother you anymore. Let the king invoke the name of God, said the woman, so this self-styled vigilante won't ruin everything, to say nothing of killing my son. As surely as God lives, he said, not so much as a hair of your son's head will be lost. Then she asked, may I say one more thing to my master, the king? He said, go ahead. Why then, the woman said, have you done this very thing against God's people? In his verdict, the king convicts himself by not bringing home his exiled son. We all die sometime. Water spill on the ground can't be gathered up again, but God does not take away life. He works out ways to get the exile back. The king then said, I'm going to ask you something. Answer me truthfully. Certainly, she said, let my master the king speak. The king said, is the hand of Joab mixed up in this? On your life, my master king, a body can't veer an inch right or left and get by with it in your royal presence. Yes. Oh, she just threw Joab under the bus. Yes, it was your servant Joab who put me up to this. I knew what that lady doing all that talking, running off at the mouth like that. Eventually, all this would come out. Yes, it was your servant Joab who put me up to this and put these words in my mouth. It was because he wanted to turn things around that your servant Joab did this. But my master is wise as God's angels in knowing how to handle things on the earth. Then the king spoke to Joab. All right, I'll do it. Go and bring the young man Absalom back. Joab bowed deeply in reverence and blessed the king. I'm reassured to know that. So why would Joab want to bring him back and later kills him? I'm reassured to know that I'm still in your good graces and have your confidence since the king has taken the counsel of his servant. Joab got up, went to Geshur, and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. The king said, he may return to his house, but he is not to see me face to face. So Absalom returned home, but was not permitted to see the king. Now, if I was Absalom, I wouldn't return with those kind of terms. Now, you don't want to see me face to face, I'm not coming back. This Absalom, there wasn't a man in all Israel talked about so much for his handsome good looks and not a blemish on him from head to toe. When he cut his hair, he always cut it short in the spring because it had grown so heavy. The weight of the hair from his head was over 2 pounds. That's a lot of hair. 3 sons were born to Absalom and 1 daughter. Her name was Tamar, and she was a beauty. Absalom lived in Jerusalem for 2 years, guess he named after his sister, and not once did he see the king face to face. He sent for Joab to get him in to see the king, but Joab still wouldn't budge. He tried a second time, and Joab still wouldn't budge. So he told his servants, listen, Joab's field adjoins mine, and he has a crop of barley in it. Go set fire to it. I guess Absalom is like, I'll get his attention now. You won't listen to me? I'll get your attention. I'll set your field on fire. So Absalom's servants set fire to the field. That got him moving. I bet so. Joab came to Absalom at home and said, why did your servant set my field on fire? Absalom answered, listen, I sent for you saying, come and soon. I want to send you to the king to ask, what's the point of my coming back from Geshur? I'd be better off still there. Let me see the king face to face. If he finds me guilty, then he can put me to death. Joab went to the king and told him what was going on. Absalom was in summon. He came and bowed deeply in reverence before him, and the king kissed Absalom. Set the man's field on fire. So I bet I'll get his attention now. This is the word of the Lord.